Hello and welcome to a brand new section, and we are going to start this section by learning something about fragments. So what I have done is that I've actually created a brand new project here, which is a React project, and I've actually cleaned up the files as well so that we don't have any additional set of code here. And the reason for creating a new project is because the previous project contained multiple components and I didn't want you guys to get confused. So if you're in the same position and if you have multiple components here, make sure to create a new project for practice. Okay, so now let's discuss about what are fragments and why they are used. So what fragments allow you to do is that they allow you to group children component together or child components together without adding an extra node to DOM. So this sentence might seem a little bit confusing, so let's take an example to understand this. So in order to understand this, let's actually create a new folder here, which is going to be our components folder. And inside the components folder, let's create a new component and call it as fragment component.js. And let's create that particular component of fragment here. So I'll use a regular function. So export default function, that's going to be fragment component. Okay, so once we have this component, as usual with every component, what you have to do is you have to return the div, and then let's say inside this particular fragment component you have two children, which is the h1 tag and the h2 tag. So let's say this is a heading, and let's create a h2 tag which says something like subheading. So this is all fine and good. Now let's import that component in app.js and see how that would work. So I'll go inside this particular div and simply add fragment component here, and this will be auto imported. And now if we go to the browser, as you can see, this is what you will be able to get. Now if you inspect this, let's see what happens. So if you go inside this particular body of the HTML, as you can see, this is div ID root. However, if you take a look one level deeper, you will have another div here with a class app, and that is nothing but it's actually this div right here. But in that div, there's going to be this another div, which is this div right here for our component. And within this div, you have the two headings, which is heading and the subheading. So you'll notice that this div does not have any class, and right now at the moment this div is unnecessary. So if I just go ahead and try to remove this, let's see what would happen. So if I try to remove this, go back here, you will actually get a warning which says something like the JSX elements in a component must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So what React tells us is that whenever you have to create a component and whenever you need to render some elements, you should always render all the elements inside one single parent component, which is going to be this div. The problem here is that if we add div, everything works, but we have an unnecessary div up over here, which we don't want in some cases. So in such cases, what you need to do is that you need to use the React fragments. So the question is how to use a React fragment. So first of all, whenever you have to use React fragment, you have to import React. So I would say import React from React. And once we import React, the next thing which we need to do is that we need to replace this div with React.Fragment, and also replace this with React.Fragment as well. So I will say React.Fragment over here as well. And now let's see what happens. So now if you take a look at this heading, as you can see, these two h1 and h2 tags are now being enclosed inside a fragment. However, you don't get that extra div here. Instead, you only have the root as well as the app div, and you don't have that div which didn't had any class. And this happened because you have now used fragment, and now that extra node is not being added to the DOM. Now you might ask, why exactly would you need that? So the best example of requiring this kind of a fragment is when you have to create tables and you have to create columns inside those tables. So we are going to take that example shortly, but even before that, let's learn how we could create fragments by using a shorthand notation. So you might think that whenever you have to create a fragment, you would have to write this react.fragment, but that is not the case. Instead, you could use a shorthand wherein you have to delete this and just keep empty pair of brackets here. And if we have that, this would still work as react.fragment because this is the shorthand for using fragments. So if I go back here, hit refresh, as you can see, still we have the div id root, div class app, and here we don't have any of the extra div here because now we are using fragments. So this is the short form for using fragments. And now once we have learned what are fragments and what they do, in the next lecture, let's learn why exactly do we need to use fragments and in which particular case fragments are useful. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.